Welcome to the Stoic Responder Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Healy. As a special agent who spent more than 15 years conducting large-scale fraud, money laundering, and public corruption investigations, Stoic philosophy provided a mindset edge that became the foundation of my professional success. My mission today is to share those same ancient mindset lessons with you so that you can turn obstacles into opportunities and adversity into advantage. Time to muster up. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Stoic Responder Podcast. This is episode 114, and I'm going to be jumping right into the episodes this week. I've got 4 quick episodes for you this week that hopefully are going to set you up for a great end of the year, kind of help you get through this last 2 weeks of, gluttony. We're going to talk about that today. The last 2 weeks of stress and everything that comes along with the Christmas and New Year's holidays. I'm going to set up 4 quick episodes for you this week. They'll hopefully give you kind of an anchor point, a guide star, a North Star, something that's going to help you recognize something in yourself as you get through these last couple of weeks of the year and turn the page on 2024. So let me start you out with today's episode, the Wholesome Rule of Life. I'm going to start out with a Seneca quote that I thought was appropriate for this time of year. Seneca, of course, was born around the same time as Jesus Christ. So we're in this season celebrating the birth of Jesus. It's kind of interesting to quote an individual who, by some historical accounts, was born the same year or within a year or two of Jesus's own birth. So just kind of put that in your mind as you're thinking about when Seneca existed. He existed at the same time as Christ. He existed historically during that same period of time, that first century, as it were. And he was an advisor. He was a poet. He was a playwright. He was an investor. He was a philosopher. He was an advisor to emperors like Nero. Really kind of as the Stoics go, kind of the member of high society that preceded really the greatest kind of the most elevated Stoic ever, which of course is Marcus Aurelius. But Seneca held this very high place in society around the time of Christ's life. So when you're thinking about the holidays, you're thinking about Christmas, you're thinking about, little town of Bethlehem and, away in a manger and all of these things, this, 2,000 years ago, that seems oh so long ago. Just remember that just like we pull from the Bible, just like we pull from other things in antiquity, there's great knowledge to be gained from that period of time that is still applicable to our modern lives over 2,000 years later, and Seneca is a great example of that. So let me start you with the Seneca quote. Hold fast that to this sound and wholesome rule of life, that you indulge the body only so far as is needed for good health. So I'm going to go, before I go back 2,000 years in the past, I'm going to go back about 1,400 years in the past to England in the 14th and 15th century, the time of Geoffrey Chaucer, when he was writing the Canterbury Tales. Now, for those of you who didn't take 9th grade English and are unfamiliar with the Canterbury Tales, it's a collection of 24 stories that were all written by Geoffrey Chaucer. It was written in a London-based version of Middle English, which is not the English that you're familiar with today. It's certainly not the American English that your middle school age children are speaking. God only knows what we would call that. But Middle English kind of, preceded the English that we speak today. And you can read Chaucer in the original spelling and script, but it's written in a certain prose. It's not rhyming. It's not the iambic pentameter that Shakespeare wrote in, but it's written in prose. And so it's very challenging and difficult. And I know for myself, I read this in high school, I think 9th or 10th grade. We were reading different parts of the Canterbury Tales, and you're probably familiar with the stories in the Canterbury Tales. What it is, again, it's about 24 stories that Chaucer wrote that comprised a kind of group of individuals. And these individuals were all pilgrims that were traveling together from London to the town of Canterbury to visit a shrine. I think it's the shrine of St. Thomas Becket at the Canterbury Cathedral. And they're all traveling. So these are pilgrims who are traveling, and each one of them Chaucer uses to tell a tale, to tell a story, typically a cautionary tale, typically a story about morality, something that you gain some sense from of how to live right, or what to be cautious of, and how you should do things differently. And so he talks about a lot of different things. And there's, as I said, 24 different stories. There were some like 30 or so pilgrims that were introduced in the prologue that stories were never written about. So a lot of people think that, this kind of magnum opus that Chaucer spent, 30 years writing was still incomplete at the time it was finished. So, be grateful for that. If you had to read the Canterbury Tales in high school, that you could have been reading a lot more Middle English if Chaucer had finished his work. But we can still go back, to the late 1300s, early 1400s, which is when the Canterbury Tales was based, when Chaucer was writing it, and we can still gain wisdom from what he was writing that overlaps in large part with the wisdom that Seneca was sharing in the first century, 15 or 1400 years prior to that, which is identical to the wisdom that we need right here and right now in this time and place in this season. So let's start out with the sin of gluttony. Chaucer talks a lot in the Canterbury Tales, makes multiple references to the sin of gluttony. In one story, he presents a pilgrim known as the Pardoner, in the Pardoner's Tale, as an embodiment of gluttony. He depicts him as being involved in excessive consumption of food and drink along the path to Canterbury. And he emphasizes that he has this insatiable appetite and a lack of self-control. That's really a cautionary tale about all of those things. Well, those are very Stoic things to be cautionary about. Elsewhere in the Canterbury Tales, Chaucer explores the consequences of gluttony through the story of the Friar's Tale, who again, he overindulges so much that it turns him into a morally corrupt figure who abuses his position of authority within the church and takes advantage of people's generosity for his own personal gain. These are just two examples within the Canterbury Tales where Chaucer talks about that sin of gluttony, which is, of course, a sin that is talked about in the Christian church. Well, here, the Stoics also warned about the corrupting effect. 1,400 years prior to Chaucer, 2,000 years prior to today, the Stoics were warning about the corrupting effect of excessive indulgence or attachment to bodily pleasures, to excessive consumption of food, of alcohol, of anything that gives us pleasure, and how those insatiable appetites can lead to lack of self-control, which can lead to moral corruption and ethical corruption. And so when you hear Seneca admonishing us to indulge the body only so far as is needful for good health, you can hear echoes of that in Chaucer's writings in the Pardoner's Tale and the Friar's Tale throughout the Canterbury Tales when he talks about this same idea. And it's important for us to remember that this time of year, because why? We are in the season of indulgence. We are in the season in which it is easy for us to overindulge, in which it is easy for us to have spent most of the year being relatively disciplined, doing a good job, and then to come in to the last 2 weeks of the year and really just slide into the new year sideways, because there are Christmas parties, there are plays, there are carolers, there are hay rides, there are meet and greets with Santa. If you've got kids, you are being pulled in 15 different directions right now. And every direction you're pulled in, there's an opportunity for excessive consumption of food or drink. We were at my mother-in-law's house this weekend, and in her neighborhood, just trying to get out of the neighborhood. It was hard to get out of the neighborhood because so many homes in her neighborhood, people were hosting parties, and there were cars parked on both sides of the street. And it was just it just adds an element of chaos to just trying to get out of the neighborhood. But what I was reminded of is that in every one of those houses, at every one of those parties, there are, rich desserts and appetizers and meats and cheeses. And, we're having a good time and we're celebrating. And we're all enjoying the season. But then we wake up in the beginning of January just feeling absolutely horrible because we didn't take any time for self-control. We didn't take any time we didn't remind ourselves, as Seneca says, to indulge the body only so far as is needful for good health. You see, we can celebrate, we can have a good time, we can celebrate the season, we can celebrate being among friends and family, while still reminding ourselves of what our limits are and should be. We don't have to take the governor completely off. We don't have to throw caution to the wind. We don't have to set aside all of that and become gluttonous just because it's the season. We give ourselves that excuse, but it doesn't have to be that way. I talked last week about the things that I'm doing to kind of manage that chaotic season. That means I am increasing the amount of movement I'm doing. I'm getting 15,000 or so steps a day, sometimes more than that. but I'm exceeding that every single day. I'm getting plenty of sleep. I'm getting 100 ounces of water minimum with electrolytes every single day. I'm doing all of those things because I know that I don't want to be the guy sitting there on my phone counting calories in my fitness pal. I want to be able to enjoy myself and indulge a little bit. But if I'm going to do that, I have to balance that out somewhere. There has to be some self-control in other areas of our lives if we're going to allow ourselves a little bit of break, a little bit of indulgence this time of year, where we get off track, where it becomes similar to what Chaucer explains in his cautionary tales, is when we allow ourselves to slide completely off track this time of year. And then again, we wake up on New Year's Day wondering what the hell happened, why we are puffy and bloated and 10 pounds heavier than we were on October 30th, the day before the Halloween binge begins and slides all the way into the end of the year. So what Seneca is reminding us here is a good thing to remind ourselves of. What Chaucer was reminding us is a good thing to remind ourselves of. And we should take heed in this season of indulgence to adhere to this simple principle. Indulge the body only so far as is needful for good health. We can avoid the temptation to overindulge in bodily pleasures. We can. We can be balanced. We just have to be conscious of it because it is far too easy for us to keep going back for seconds and thirds if we don't pause and remind ourselves of this simple fact. And when we adhere to this principle, we can avoid that temptation to create distractions in our lives. They're going to keep us from our higher goals. They're going to keep us from being moral creatures. Because when we indulge in one area of our lives, as the saying goes, how you approach anything is how you approach everything. We overindulge and we don't have self-discipline in one area of our lives. It has a tendency to bleed over into others. So don't let yourself start that skid. Don't let yourself go down that road. Keep the guardrails up. Do something if you're going to be pulled in 15 different directions. And like me, you don't want to be the guy who's entering your macros into MyFitnessPal in the middle of the holiday season. At least do something to balance the ledger. Do something to increase the activity if you're going to increase the indulgence. Don't slide into self-control this holiday season. You can avoid it. All right, let me leave you with a journal prompt. And I got 3 more episodes for you this week that hopefully also give you a little bit of an anchor point going through the holidays. Here it is. Get out your Big Chief notebook, get out your pencil, and write this down. Where am I being gluttonous? And what is the corrupting effect of that gluttony on my well-being? This is one of those great things to ask yourself. Like, I was feeling pretty miserable the other day because I overindulged. I still got my steps in. I still did everything that I needed to do, but I knew at the end of the day, I was like, I guarantee you my calorie input exceeded my output. And I felt pretty gross. Didn't feel great about it. So asking yourself this question every day, where am I being gluttonous? And reminding yourself is a great way to get back on track more quickly. It's a great way to avoid making the same mistake tomorrow that you made today. Where am I being gluttonous? And what is the corrupting effect on my overall well-being? All right, folks, we'll be back tomorrow. We'll be back Thursday. We'll be back Friday. And that's going to be it for the year. Quick reminder, that's going to be it for the year. So if you want to get the podcast in the new year, what I would ask you to do between now and the time we come back in January is go on over to the stoicresponder.substack.com. Sign up for free over there because over the course of the break, I am going to be transitioning our platform from Libsyn, where I currently host the podcast, entirely over to Substack. Reason being, it's just a better platform for what I do, and it's a little bit more cost effective for managing and running a free podcast. So I would ask you to go over to the stoicresponder.substack.com and sign up to get the podcast free in your email 4 times a week. If you could do that sometime over the next couple of weeks, you'll make sure you won't miss any episodes when we come back in the new year. Folks, we'll see you tomorrow. Until then, you are out of roll. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, like, rate, and share this podcast so that we can spread the benefits of Stoicism to other first responders. It will only take you a few moments, but it can help us tremendously. Until next time, out of roll.